The Cincinnati Bengals add beef to the defensive trenches and shock us with pick 80. Let's break down the Bengals day 2.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network here on Locked On Bengals, where you can find this podcast on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. If you're new to the show, hit the subscribe button, please. 1, it'll let you know when we upload content. That'll make it easy to find the videos and the podcasts when they're uploaded. 2, we really appreciate it. That'd be really nice of you. The Bengals have 2 days of drafting in the books, James, and we're going to break down the second round today. And we were really close in a couple of ways to nailing our predictive mock. Max Melton obviously goes much earlier than we had him in the predictive mock, but we start 2 for 2 with Kris Jenkins going to the Cincinnati Bengals in the second round. And when they go Amarius Mims in the first round, it feels like defensive tackle is priority number 1 in round number 2. And then there's a crazy run with teams trading up, and my hopes held out for Johnny Newton in a trade up there don't come to fruition, but instead they land with Kris Jenkins staying put at 49.
Yeah, and there's a lot to like about this pick. First off, he was really high on their board, and Zach Taylor and Lou Anarumo talking about how they were squinting, or I think Lou mentioned the squinting, but just staring at his name, hoping that he would be there. I think they had it Johnny Newton and then Kris Jenkins. Out of all those defensive tackles that went, I think that's how their board lined up. And so to get Jenkins, to get the consolation prize for Johnny Newton, the Johnny Newton dream that Jake Lisco tried to manifest. You really tried in every way, from Locked On Bengals insiders, and shout out to all of our insiders, to the show we did on Friday where we led with Newton and how they could trade up, all of those things. It doesn't happen, but they got a really good player in Kris Jenkins, and someone that is going to contribute right away, is going to be their third defensive tackle. And I think you tweeted this. Obviously they're getting worse without DJ Reader, but the trio might be better that they have this year with a guy like Kris Jenkins. Like DT3 might be better. Maybe it was you or Joe or somebody tweeted it.
Yeah, that was me.
Okay, there we go.
There was a clear need on this team for a third defensive tackle. When DJ Reader or BJ Hill were off the field last year, and Josh Tupou or Zach Carter had to come on the field, and they had to rotate a defensive tackle. It was noticeable. You'd see a run get ripped off, and then the replay would be like, I wonder if Zach Carter was in on this play. I wonder if DJ Reader needed a break when he was healthy last year. And then you look up on the replay and you see the trench view of it, and it's like, oh, yep, there's Zach Carter. And so Kris Jenkins should, you never know, right? You never know if a player is going to hit. But on paper, a second-round defensive tackle with the track record of run defense that Kris Jenkins has, the athleticism that Kris Jenkins brings to the Bengals' interior defensive line, should improve them at that rotational DT3 spot immediately. And that was a big need for this team.
It was a huge need. And to me, this is the typical Bengals pick where you get a guy who comes from a winning program, that is the captain, that is going to come in and contribute right away and be part of the culture. And would it shock you if Kris Jenkins had a C on his chest at some point here at Paycor Stadium? I don't think it would shock anyone. And we talked to him after he was picked, and he was super excited, said how he wanted to be a complete defensive tackle, and that's how he views himself, as a defensive tackle. He was asked about how PFF described him as a run stuffer and 99% run stuffer, or whatever it is. And obviously he comes in and is going to help them right away in that area. And that's important, especially in the AFC North. But man, I look at it, and some of these defensive tackles that went ahead of him, I'm sure that the pundits are going to wonder why Jenkins was able to fall after the run on DTs to 49. And so I like it a lot. I think this pick makes sense. And it's why we predicted it, I think, is because it fits if he were to make it there, and he somehow made it there despite the run on DTs.
Yeah, and it's a pick that sets a theme or follows a theme that we're going to discuss for each of the 4 picks the Bengals have made so far, where the flashes for Kris Jenkins are excellent. Even in the pass rush, where he didn't have the most productivity as a pass rusher, he wasn't this penetrating 3 technique in the Michigan defense where he's racking up pressures and sacks, but he did have an 11% pass rush win rate in 2023, which is pretty good. It's not elite. It's not the 15, 17, 18, 19% of the Mike Halls and the Byron Murphys and the Johnny Newtons, the higher end pass rushers in the class. But he also didn't have a ton of opportunities to do it. But when he did, the flashes were there. And so when you think about the flashes that that Kris Jenkins put on tape, the flashes that Amarius Mims has on tape, the flashes that we're going to talk about with the 3rd round picks for the Bengals, they're clearly swinging for upside in this draft. That is a theme that we've seen for the first 2 days of this draft. And if Jenkins hits that upside, then I think he can develop into a 3-down player. Do I think that he's going to be a 3-down player right away? No, I don't think that that's what the Bengals are going to ask him to do right away. I think that his role in the Bengals defense will be different from what it was in the Michigan defense, and that will have an acclimatization period that will have the normal NFL transition where things are going to be a little bit different. He's going to have to learn a slightly different role, but if he can hit that upside, then he could be a starter for you in a 3-down player down the road. Do I still think they have a need for a penetrating pass rushing type defensive tackle? Sure. And they could have gotten that this year, but I don't completely write off Kris Jenkins' upside in that area.
No, me neither. I don't either, especially once people start to hear him, and we obviously haven't met in person, but you can just tell that he's made of the right whatever it is to maximize what he has. And his nickname is the Mutant, which is one of the best nicknames ever. And so, no, I think it's really hard not to like this pick. And I think he's pretty complete. And from a what you're looking for this team, like I said, all the intangibles, all of those things. Plus, he's really talented. He's athletic, and he's going to have the work ethic. And so, whatever his ceiling is, I think he's going to get to it. And you're right, he's not going to hit the ground running like he did at Michigan when he's helping them win national championships. But I do think he'll be able to contribute as a rookie, and it's a really good pick there. And yet we have another defensive tackle to get to, but I think we need to get to the shock of the draft first, which
let me add a couple things if you don't mind. Is that okay? Can I jump back in on Kris Jenkins for a minute here, James?
it's fine. You can bore people with trench talk instead of the most important pick of the draft to this point, because it shocked everyone.
I think what's exciting about it with Jenkins is that they add that athleticism. You mentioned it when you were kind of trying to wrap up there. The athleticism injection that Jenkins represents is exciting. They needed athleticism on that interior defensive line. And since it comes with a package that was very productive in run defense at Michigan, I think that is an enticing pick. I give it a B as my final instant knee-jerk reaction. Grade.
If you give another grade, I'm going to fly to Canada and I'm going to steal
We're
your
not doing grades? Okay.
No.
Then the last thought is 4 straight years with a Michigan player picked and 3 straight years with a Michigan player picked with a round 2 or higher pick for the Cincinnati Bengals, this time going to the trenches after a couple years doing it in the defensive backfield.
Yeah, I like it. I think Kris Jenkins might have the biggest impact of the 3, since there's some questions about how they use the first rounder, and we'll see. But DJ Turner probably going to start for this team this year. But let's get to the shock of the draft. I said most important. That's clearly not true. Amarius Mims is the most important, but it certainly was the shock of the draft. Jermaine Burton is a Bengal. We will get to that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. And that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else. So whatever your small business is, if you're trying to find the qualified candidates faster Well, you got to go to LinkedIn because over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. And on LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
This episode of your favorite Locked On podcast is brought to you by the best meal kit service in the game, Home Chef. No more having to answer the dreaded question, what are we going to do for dinner tonight? Thanks to Home Chef and their chef-designed recipes that are delivered directly to my door, all pre-packaged, pre-portioned. They even peel the garlic cloves for you. And each recipe, one of my favorites, blackened mahi-mahi, comes with a full page of easy-to-read instructions that include customization options and pictures to guide you along the way through the step-by-step process so you don't have to ask, is that what chard looks like? I cannot recommend Home Chef enough, especially right now, because for a limited time, Home Chef is giving Locked On listeners 18 free meals, free dessert for life, and of course, free shipping on your first box if you head to homechef.com/lockedon today. That's homechef.com/lockedon for 18 free meals and free dessert for life. Yes, you heard that right. Homechef.com/lockedon. Must be an active subscriber to receive free dessert.
To start the third round for the Bengals, they had 2 picks in the third round, and Jermaine Burton was a guy that I watched a game of, James, pretty early in the process for me. It was February. And then I stopped because someone told me there were character concerns. And I said, okay, well, Zach Taylor hasn't picked character concerns in his time with the Cincinnati Bengals, but clearly there's comfort with Jermaine Burton.
Yeah, a ton of comfort. I mean, a pound the table, you're so excited you get him comfort. A fact that Zach Taylor called him a, quote, great receiver comfort. Think about that. Called him a great receiver right now. I asked him, and that was the quote. So, yeah, I think this is very much a Zach Taylor is extremely comfortable with Jermaine Burton, the person, the player, and man, is there a lot to like about the player. Let's start there because everyone's going to lead with the character concern. Let's talk about the player because you're talking about 20.5 yards per catch last year, over 700 yards receiving for Alabama, 8 touchdowns, no drops, and can play slot, can play outside, obviously is the deep threat, good in contested catch situations, averaged 18.5 yards per catch in SEC for 4 years. And so there's a lot to like. There is. And they love the tape. And you tweeted out, you were really good. You were on this from Dane Brugler to Steve Palazzolo, all these different analysts. John Ledyard loved the pick. All these guys loving the fact that the Bengals added Jermaine Burton. And so the player on the field certainly is someone you want, but there's the off the field concerns. There's a reason he was there at 80. There's a reason why we didn't really discuss him on this podcast. And it's simple. The Bengals haven't gone this route. They go with the Kris Jenkinses. It's what they've done. And it feels risky because we haven't seen this iteration of the Bengals do this. I remember Marvin doing this in the mid 2000s, right? Where it's like, oh, character concerns, but man, the upside's there. And that was a normal conversation. So I get it. And I remember that vividly. At the same time, now it's the first time I think we've seen Zach do this. And it's such a key moment that I think it's interesting and could nail it. TJ Hushmanzada is obviously a fan of the pick. So we will see. But Jermaine Burton is a Bengal.
Yeah, Burton training with Hushmanzada and will continue to train with Hushmanzada. Hush talked to Jeff Hobson for Bengals.com talking about the adjustment to the training plan now that he knows where Burton has landed and who will be around Burton in Cincinnati, the kind of offense that is run for the wide receiver that Hush is training. And when they picked Burton, my immediate reaction was throw out everything you thought you knew about the way the Bengals draft wide receiver, because while Burton does check a lot of their boxes in terms of the measurables, in terms of having some production, he did not have early production in college, despite playing for huge schools, the Georgia, Alabama career where some say Kirby Smart was fed up with him and essentially ran him out of town. And Saban, who recruited him out of high school, didn't want him out of high school in the end, was a little bit picky about the personality coming out of high school, took him on as a transfer. Saban had some thoughts about the maturity and the emotions that Burton displays, and will probably need to control a little bit better as he grows and matures at the next level when he was picked and he's doing his TV coverage. But the breakout age outlier for Cincinnati, the character outlier for the Zach Taylor drafting era are both significant for Jermaine Burton. So why would they do it? As well, because they've got a guy that they think probably has first round tape, and they're clearly comfortable with the person.
Explain breakout age for people.
Right. Good call. Breakout age is an indicator that is used in advanced, mostly fantasy is actually where it started. That just kind of tells you this is the age at which this is a year that the player was X% of their offense's passing game. I think it's 25%. And for Jermaine Burton, it was very late. The Bengals typically like to draft players with early breakout ages. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd, all examples where they were very productive early in their career. So whether you know exactly what breakout age is or whether I've messed up the definition or not here, and somebody can correct me in the comments if I have, it's essentially just an indicator that they were productive at a young age.
Yep.
And that's what that means. The Bengals have prioritized this consistently when drafting wide receivers for like a decade until last year. Last year, we kind of wrote it off as they made some exceptions on day 3 in a class that has all these COVID seniors, and they still have COVID seniors this year, obviously, and that'll increase in day 3. But apparently, they're much more willing to overlook that now than they used to be. If this is something that they indeed did use as a metric, and it seemed like they did because it was so consistent with the wide receivers they've drafted for years.
Yeah, I agree. And that's what's interesting. That's the other element of this is it was like character. He's also 23. It's not like he had multiple 1,000-yard seasons or anything like that. But I do think that this is very much a look at the tape, and the tape stands out. You mentioned it, first round tape. And when you do produce like he did in the SEC from a yards per catch standpoint, despite the maturity questions, despite switching schools, all of those things. And you're playing in really talented receiver rooms, of course. He's got something to him. And so he has a hell of an opportunity here, right? I read Dane Brugler's draft guide, and you just read the summary at the end, and it's underachieved in college, will be a better pro. Well, what better situation than if you're Jermaine Burton to come to not only the team that your trainer became a great at, right? TJ Hushmanzada is a Bengal great. He's been training you. And so now you get to come to Cincinnati, but Joe Burrow's here. Jamar Chase is here. And you can mold your game. You guys are both 6 foot tall. You can mold your game after him. Burton, just over 200 pounds. Like there's some similarities there from how they're built. No one's Jamar, but there are some similarities there. And so, and obviously T. Higgins is as mature as they come to, and he can learn from him as well. So I do think this is about as good of a landing spot. Oh, by the way, Joe Burrow's going to throw the ball all over the field. As good of a landing spot as you could ask for if you're Jermaine Burton. And it's up to him to prove Zach Taylor right and prove the Bengals right. And if he does, the Bengals got a steal in a really good receiver class. And it's a really good class, right? There aren't many guys that have done what Jermaine Burton was able to do on tape, to your point, and to draft pundits' points. And he does fit an explosive player that can play outside, inside. Like football-wise, he fits, Jake, and it's exciting thinking about.
Has slot experience, extensive slot wide receiver experience in his second to last year in school back in 2022, played a lot of slot for Alabama, was a huge deep threat then in his last year at Alabama, where his average depth of target over 20 yards was 4th in the country, more than half of his receiving yards, over 450 yards on deep balls. I think was really good on contested catches as well, which is something that PFF and Dame both point out. And like you said, maybe we don't have time to read the full quotes now, but PFF, Steve Palazzolo, and Trevor Sikkema both extremely high on Jermaine Burton. Palazzolo had Jermaine Burton as his 4th best receiver in the class, as did John Ledyard. And Nate Ty said he has maybe the best hands in the class. When you have all of that in a package, it can also take the top off of defenses. That's a pretty exciting player to be a complementary future teammate and running mate with Jamar Chase as a long-term piece to be your number 2. Because the Bengals don't need a number 1. They've got that in Jamar Chase, and they've got a 1A for at least this year, we think, in T. Higgins. So when you can be a complementary piece in the short term and the long term, I think you've got something there. Let's talk about the last pick for the Bengals on day 2. McKinley, Jackson, and nose tackle, and we were very close to going with another check mark for the predictive mock. We'll get into that coming up next. Today's episode of Locked On Bengals brought to you by Monopoly Go. Maybe you're getting a little bit antsy between picks during the NFL draft. You're not really sure who the Bengals are going to pick. You're not sure if the Bengals are going to pick the right guy. You dig deep, lift your head up, and say, you know what? Let's just get back into the game. Let's pull off some heists. Let's take some of my friends' money. And that's where Monopoly Go gives you that outlet. It lets you compete with your friends to get the most riches and the biggest empires. So Monopoly you love, but on your phone anytime with lots of new twists and leaderboards to compare your progress to your pals. There's so much to do, including those dynamic Monopoly boards, and there's countless of them out there. You can make your friends bankrupt by smashing their landmarks with a wrecking ball. You can charge other players for rent on your iconic properties. And maybe you're feeling the spirit of cooperation instead of competition. You can work with your friends as well to crack open community chests and tournaments to get extra rewards and climb the leaderboard. So put on your game face and download Monopoly Go today for free on the App Store and on Google Play.
All right, Jake, let's get to McKinley Jackson. But before we do, you teased it. Did we almost get it right? Why did we almost get it right? What are you talking about?
We had McKinley Jackson at 115, didn't we? In the predictive mock, didn't we land
we probably did, actually.
So what I remember is that I wanted to put him in 97, and you're like, no, let's not put him in 97. We don't.
No, because it's a bad pick. Right. So perfect. Either way, we got it right. It's a bad pick here. It's early. It is. And I don't blame the Bengals, and I'm not being mean to McKinley Jackson here. It's just early, and that's what happens when you have a need, right? In this idea that, all right, teams don't draft for a need. Every team drafts for need, and you want to go BPA that fits your needs. And they were able to do that. Like Kris Jenkins, I think fits that really well. McKinley Jackson is the biggest. All three of these other guys, I get it with Burton. Like he would have probably went pretty quickly after pick 80 because someone would have just been like the Bengals and been all in on him. And he visited a lot of teams. There are other teams that didn't have him on their board. With McKinley Jackson, it's it makes sense because they need that 330-pound nose tackle, because they need that guy that is going to be able to clog up those running lanes and eat up that space. So the player makes sense. I just think it was a tad early. That's all.
And I do wonder if McKinley Jackson can be the nose tackle they need him to be. He's not going to be asked to do a lot right away. But when you look at boards around the internet, because that's the resource we've got now between Dane Brugler and PFF and, you name it, he's got, a 6th, 7th round grade. And that's most of where it is. The film grades are a little bit better. Mm-hmm. Joe Goodberry's film grade was a solid, I think, late day 2, early day 3. Draft guy Jared, who does his big boy board where he goes through all the trench players. Similar idea. But I do wonder if he will be the nose tackle they need him to be. He's a big body, and he has the frame to do it. He has the strength to do it, but will need to be coached up, and will need to get on the right track with the Bengals. And the Bengals, unfortunately, have this history of picking defensive linemen in the 3rd and 4th round, interior defensive linemen in the 3rd and 4th round, and then not getting it right. And this goes all the way back to like Brandon Thompson in 2014, 13, 12, whatever year that was, more than 10 years ago, I think, in the Brandon or the Devin Still draft. So the history of 12.
Yep.
Yeah. So more than 10 years ago. Eventually we got there. I just had to count down a few years, but they kind of need to get it right. Like their DT3 is better because they add Kris Jenkins in the 2nd round. We think if that pick goes according to plan, their DT3 is better, period. But they still need a nose tackle, a rotational nose tackle, because they don't have one on the team. It's not just DJ Reader we're talking about here either. It's also the Josh Tupou snaps. They need 2 guys that are going to be able to rotate in and elevate what they got from DT3 and DT4 last year. I hope that McKinley Jackson does that. I'm not sure that he will. I hope that he can. He has the body to do so, And he, again, has flashes. And this is what I mean about this theme of drafting to the flashes. Jermaine Burton's upside is sensational if he hits it. McKinley Jackson's flashes are great. But the question, and Dane Brugler pointed this out, is why isn't it more consistent for McKinley Jackson? And
Sure.
so, like, that's where when you're picking a nose tackle in a world of nose tackles where we think you can get one on day 3 and there's not going to be a huge difference, and there's an inconsistency question, and you look at some of the other options, that's why it feels early. But hopefully the Bengals are just smarter than us. It's happened before. It'll happen again. And that's the hope with this pick.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, if he turns out to be a productive guy that can man that spot, well, then it's worth the 97th pick, right? There's no debate there. And he doesn't need to become a Pro Bowler to be worth it. He just needs to be solid. And so hopefully he can. Look, the Bengals defensive line is much, much better than it was 24 hours ago. The trenches are much, much better. There's much better depth with these 3 guys than than they had 48 hours ago. I get it. You mentioned Burton and like the flashes. I think as a player, it's not just flashes. I think he's that dude. Like I don't really worry about the upside from a playing standpoint as much as I do just making sure he's mature, right, and carries himself the right way.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's all. With McKinley, yeah, in Draft Guy Jared's big on McKinley Jackson, like really liked what he saw and was tweeting out some stuff about it. And so the Bengals probably saw the good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's a need, you start to overlook some of the bad stuff. And that's, or you don't care about it enough because you know you got to have it.
Yeah.
And it's just a tough place to be in, because if you're at a buffet and you got to eat and you're desperate to eat and they're out of the good fried chicken and man, they got some bad sushi. I say I like sushi, so it's not really bad sushi, but buffet sushi is bad sushi. You got some buffet sushi over there. You want the fried chicken, but the fried chicken, you settle for the sushi. You like that analogy?
I lost the analogy somewhere there where you got confused about the sushi. I was like, what are we doing? What are we talking about?
I'm saying buffet sushi is not good. You agree with that? It's 1 a.m., bro.
Yeah, no.
Do you think buffet sushi is good? Most buffet sushi is not
good.
I've
never seen or eaten buffet sushi.
There we go. See, so how can it be good?
How could it be good? Interesting notes on McKinley Jackson here. While he was a team captain in 2023, he was suspended in 2021. He did have some drug charges in his background, according to Dane Brugler's The Beast, possession of a controlled substance. So that is something to note. A couple of players, and Brugler mentioned this in his coverage on the NFL Athletic show, or the Athletic NFL show, where they're doing live coverage. 2 players for the Bengals in the 3rd round that some teams just did not have on their board, apparently, due to those character concerns. The Bengals cleared them, obviously, and the Bengals did their homework, but the Bengals are the team that took on the risk for both of those players. And so they must be very high on the football product for both of those guys, obviously, not only for being strongly convinced enough to make those picks, but to have gotten through the clearance on the character as well. So a mixed character review there, I would say, for McKinley Jackson, who both was a captain in his last year in college and also had the suspension and arrest in the background.
As far as day 3 goes, because the Bengals, they've bolstered the trenches some, I think we're going to see a corner pretty early. I could see them double dipping. Right now they have 6 picks. If they keep all 6, would not shock me at all if we see another double dip, whether it's at corner, whether it's at I could see receiver. I think it's a little unlikely because Burton is that versatile piece that can do a little bit of everything. So they don't necessarily need to get another one, but I could still see it.
Man, but if a guy falls, like if Troy Franklin is still there at some point, or if Brendan Rice is still there,
they're all there. There's a ton there.
Yeah.
There's a ton.
McCaffrey got picked. And that's the
Did
only
he?
one. Luke McCaffrey got picked at 100. Yeah. At the very last pick of the 3rd round.
Who picked him?
That would be Washington. Washington having the draft of Bengals fans' dreams.
They're having a good draft. Ooh-wee. Oh, man. See,
that is 100 picks earlier than our board would have had Luke McCaffrey picked, and 43 picks earlier than his consensus rating.
He was always going early, though. Like I told you, 115 was kind of the – so anyways, the fact that all these guys are still there, like Malik Washington is still there.
Don't shy away from going back to wide receiver was what I was trying to make a point about there.
No doubt. No, and then obviously running back, interior offensive line, cornerback. Those are the three. We could see a linebacker, we could see an edge rusher, but I think those are the big three for me. And then of course, dude, if Malik Washington's there at 115, hard for me to say no to that, man.
Well, your guy Troy Franklin is still there, and nobody can figure out why Troy Franklin fell out of day 2 altogether. And I'm going to keep mentioning Rice, even though apparently the things we thought the Bengals liked in receiver are not necessarily the same things anymore. Jalen Wright and Audric,
who had a really late breakout age. Who had the latest breakout age? That's who
the latest breakout age, like the worst breakout age on the spreadsheet. Xavier Legette will be one. A guy named Hulu Griffin.
There we go.
I was naming some people I thought the Bengals. Oh, Gabriel Murphy is the other one.
Audric Estime, you said Gabriel Murphy. Yeah.
And Estime apparently could go a little bit later than we thought. Javon Baker's still out there. Dwight McGlothern, a corner that we know they met with. Wouldn't be shocked to see him come off the board to the Bengals here. And we could see a tight end. Did you mention tight end? Could see a tight end as well. With Jatavion Sanders falling all the way out of day 2 as well, I believe.
Yeah, I think he did. Now I'm in on Sanders.
Yeah, day 3, sure.
Jaheim Bell, obviously we're in on him. So
do you think they're actually targeting an interior offensive lineman here? We've mentioned it a lot, but do we believe that at this point?
Do you think that they're confident in Trey Hill?
No,
I'll tell you the answer.
But we know they like Cody Ford, and now they have Cody Ford who can focus on the interior spots with
they have no center. They have no backup center.
That's true.
They have to have it. And so you might as well get a center that can also play guard.
Limmer, Bordellini. Those guys are Bordellini can probably play a little guard.
Bordellini, baby.
Give
me the Bordellini linguine.
Let's get out of here. I'm going to go eat some tortellini. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. And we'll be back, of course, to recap day 3 as well. Until then,
I'm not.
Thanks for listening. Hoo day, and have a good one.
Do you have any spicy mayo?